My first principal residence bought me my second and started a company. Okay? So, in my life, I'm just telling you about what Dave writes about. I followed in my life. I set my goal that this is what I was going to invest in and build my net worth. And I don't ever look and say these things for people to go, oh, poor Scotty's missed out on things. No, I haven't. I've owned 3 new cars in my life. I'm 63 years old and I have owned 3 new cars. That's it. There are some people that own 3 new cars in 6 years. You notice what I drive?
Tahoe.
And how old is my Tahoe? It's coming up on 12 years and 150,000 miles.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it? I don't drive as much as I used to, but it's still good. So the disciplines in your life, which is what Dave has talked about, you have to plan for this. You've got to save some money. You have to buy assets, not liabilities. You've got to read those messages that Dave says, because that's all about preparing for this. And then we'll get into the nuts and bolts, like most people. Well, how do you go and get that first one? Well, it takes a little bit of money. And we'll talk a little bit and hear from some of the others. What you hear from everybody today, the people who have invested, doesn't mean their way is right or wrong. It means they're on a path to creating net worth. So that's just sort of a glimpse of what I've tried to do in my life. I got to a point also where I said, I don't want to sell anything anymore, because I sold several things. And you make your mistakes here and there. You always do. I've never made one that's pulled me down. You know, pulls you back just a little bit, but never made one that pulled me down. And there's another adage. Time is the great healer in real estate. There's never a bad buy. You know, hey, we got caught.
Yeah, oh yes,
well,
you're standing in one.
Time, no it's not. Because even with time, and Dave's alluding to the building, yeah, we bought it at the peak of the market, yeah, it's been a little bit of a struggle, but it's an asset that is sitting in between 2 subway stops in one of the hottest areas in the United States, Tyson's area. Okay? So you just got to live long enough to make sure that asset recovers. But time is the great healer. Okay, let's start first with how did you buy your first and or second rental? And if you want to comment on where the money came from or how you did it, go ahead.
First one, we purchased our primary residence and then we got an equity line on our primary residence because we bought our primary in 2004. So in 2005, equity was going up about $30,000 in 24 hours. So it was pretty easy to do that. And we ended up purchasing property in Emerald Isle, North Carolina. That was our first investment property.
And has it worked out well?
Kind of. I think that's going to be on what not to do, on the question on what not to do. Yeah, we did that one actually with a stated loan. So when you just said that you had a pulse and a job, and then you asked the lender how much you had to make in order to qualify for the loan, we did one of those. We also bought it sight unseen. So we saw it. We used to live in North Carolina, in Emerald Isle, actually. My husband was stationed at Camp Lejeune.
Is this a beach property?
Yes. And when we lived there, we rented, and we said that, you know, we're always going to want to come back here and purchase something. And so that's what we did. So we knew the area. So I did real estate when I was down there, and I hooked up with one of the ladies that I worked with there and said, go look at it, tell me, you know, what it really looks like, are the pictures good or not, and then we moved on it.
So our first one, I had a lot of things happening at one time. Dave had been on me about reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad for 1,000 years. I finally picked up that book, and I was reading it at the same time. I had a 28-year-old guy that came to me and said that he had $50,000 and he wanted to be a millionaire in 2 years, and for me to help him do that. And I kind of chuckled at the time because I thought, big dreams. But I started working with him, and then I had several other people, one of which is a really, really good friend of mine, who was also talking to me at the same time about buying property. But I'm sure you guys already probably know, but I'm super, super conservative. I tend to over-research everything. So I started reading on all these people that currently have a lot of money. And if you read their stories, the top 10 people at that time, I bought my first property 7 years ago now. And if you read their story, there's only one common theme, it feels like sometimes. And I actually read their biographies, and it's consistently real estate. Whether they started in real estate or they didn't start that way and made their initial money some way, they all bought property. So, but as I said, I was very conservative, so I went to my brother, and at the time it was either he was going to buy a car or do something, and I asked him if he wanted to buy a rental property with us, and that was our first. We went into it together. The loan on the property at the time was a conventional product because there were two people that, brought the money towards it. My expenses were cut in half, and I was pretty determined at the time that I wasn't going to start with a condo. I wanted what I wanted, so that's how we got started.
First rental property we bought was in 1979, which was way before I was a realtor. We had a townhouse in Herndon, and we couldn't really sell it. We were still competing with the builder. So we had the income to purchase something else. So we bought an investment property through a relative who was a Maryland realtor in Rockville, Maryland. And we kept that for about 7 years. It was an older place, and it had some issues, but it was a very good rental. And when I sold that, again, mid-80s, I guess, we cleared about $45,000, so I was able to quit my job and stay home with the kids for quite a while. So it worked out really well.
We bought our first principal residence in 2012. It was in Occoquan, Virginia, and it was a foreclosure, and it was in pretty decent condition. And we were planning to live there for a little bit longer, but the market went up quite a bit in 2013, and the rental prices versus what we bought it for were much higher. So we're like, okay, let's decide to move, because we had seen another property that would be a good potential to convert into another rental. So we moved from that residence, rented that out, and it's been working out pretty nicely so
So you
far.
keep buying them as principal residences and then renting them out.
Yeah, because you have to, it's
It's
a
easier.
better interest rate, less down payment.
So I bought my first investment property in 2010. That was the first one that I actually held. I guess before that I flipped 8 houses, but what I did it with was money that was privately borrowed. I had a great uncle that was turning 100 and moving into assisted living, and his son told me that they were going to put all of his money into a money market account, and at the time it was about 0.5%. So I asked him if I could borrow it at 3.5%, give him a 1099, and have him as a banker. And he agreed to do that for $500,000, which is what led me to do a lot of flipping initially. And then I took some of that money and made the first investment property. But 6 months after I had it, once I had an established lease, I was able to go back and do a cash out refinance and pay him back. So I had enough equity in it that if I got a 75% cash out refi, that I could give him all of his money back.
I think what Nina might have done, I don't know if she answered this, I'm trying to sit here, in the back a little bit. They bought a principal residence, and then a year or so later, they bought another principal residence and kept their first one as an investment. So the principal residence will allow you to get in with a little cash, smaller amount of cash down. Now, I can tell you that over the years, I had, like Reed, they didn't give me $500,000. I had two, Joe Herrick and Harold Alexander, that were sources for private financing for me in second trust money, so that if I could go in and try and get that 80% loan and put 5%, they would hold a 15% second. Then I could fix the property up and subsequently refinance if need be, pull the money back out and go on to the second property. So I think it pays to have a little discussion of where does some of that money come from to get involved in a property.
All right, initially, how did I finance? Savings? Always live below your means. That's all I can tell you people that are younger. We basically used my husband's salary most of the time and saved mine. No matter how good it was just put it away. Never bought new cars for years, like Scott said.
Married to an accountant, and everything has to be in the black. And for those of you that are around accountants at all, it's not an option to be in the red ever. So if we were going to buy property, it had to be in the black, including all repairs and everything. And so what we did is we decided, well, I guess he decided. Yeah, we jointly decided. That's it. We jointly decided that a portion of my income and would be saved. There were cuts that had to be made in order to accommodate that, because anyone that says normal life isn't going to happen, you know, that's not realistic. So, but we're very principled in that. So there was money coming out every month towards it, and initially it wasn't a lot because there were expenses and there were some things going on in our life at the time that we had to take care of. So, but there was a set amount going out, and if that meant that we weren't going to go out to eat every Saturday or Sunday or through the week, then that's what we did, because we were very, very determined that this was going to be the only plan. We were not counting on Social Security coming through for us when we retired, and so there was a set goal, and we worked towards it. And then initially, when we were looking at our first property, because the criteria for my property, they're pretty tight, and like I said, I wanted what I wanted. So that's why we utilized my brother's income initially, because we had saved up to a certain point, and then he, you know, funded after. Once you do your first one, the rest seem, I agree with Dave, I think they come very easy. I think the next transition always is when you go from you know, buying your residential singles to multifamily. But that's how we did it. And people come to me all the time right now. I'm working with a guy who's 18, and he came to me 2 years ago and said, I have literally $18,000, you know, and what can you do for me? And right now, he owns 6 of them.
Did you say he was 18?
He's 18.
Good for him.
Parents gave him $18,000 for graduation. He was going to go buy a car, and he chose to keep his car, and he's done quite well for himself. So I just think it's that initial, you do have to be principled, and there are sacrifices that need to be made if you're going to work towards a certain goal, because the whole premise of you can have it all, for me, is not real. You know, there's a give and take, and you have to work towards what it is that you're looking for, and that might mean that you're going to have to sacrifice in some areas.
Everybody has talked about, most everybody that's talked that I've heard has talked about they've planned to do this, and there's been a little bit of sacrifice along the way, forced savings along the way, setting aside money, whatever. So if you don't have that, and that's Dave's messages, you know, over and over and over again. If you don't have the discipline, that's the first thing to start in your life, is getting that discipline to get a little bit of, you know, money saved up. So that lesson obviously is being echoed by everyone. The source of money, okay? Most everybody has some form. Now, if you were at NVAR's trade show yesterday, the booth right next to Avery Hess Realtors, who was in the booth?
Hard money.
Hard money, private lender. Okay? Well, you're not going to get hard money, private lender for free. You're not going to get 3 7/8% interest rate, et cetera, et cetera. You'll pay a little bit more. Joe Herrick and Harold Alexander, 2 points, 12% interest only.
Maury and Joe's program.
Maury and Joe's program. But now listen, the interest rates were higher then. Would I do that same thing again today to get the money I needed? Because 12%, maybe, you know, you'll get it a little bit less than that, but those are hard money lenders, and it's worthwhile maybe. So then you're hearing people that have this combination of some either savings or some outside lenders that over time their property goes up, they either take a second trust to pull some cash out, or they refinance, okay, to pull their cash out. Now, another comment that hasn't been, you've heard people say, you can buy property no money down.
Yes, you can.
You know, to me, it's always been, we're in the real estate industry. There's opportunities out there. We just have to pay attention and look for those opportunities. You know, I bought a property. I wish I had bought 2 of them back in, I don't know, in Randolph Square in Arlington. Still own it today. And the properties had declined a little bit. I forget what year it was, 85, 86, 87. Declined a little bit in value. And I knew Dan Clemente. And Dan Clemente's Ares Corporation, he was a developer type. They had financed much of that project. There was a woman who had 2 investment properties in Randolph Square, and she was selling them, and Dan would hold the financing to make up no money down. I should have bought both of them. But what scared me at the time was when you buy no money down, chances are you're not going to have positive cash flows. But that didn't bother me. But it was $400+, and this goes back, and to have 2 of them at $800, I was a little scared of that, so I only bought the one. Now, should have bought both of them. So if you buy for no money down, if you ever find something like that, realize you are not going to steal the property in terms of the pricing. Okay, you're buying the financing is what you're buying, and you're buying. I believed in leverage. I think Reed and I have had this discussion. He believes in leverage. He's young. You know, so what's leverage? That's using everybody else's money but your own and trying to put the debt on the property.
You can get a room of 100 investors, and they're doing it 90 different ways. And you're hearing that here today. Everybody's story is a little different. But you really have to screw up to lose money.
Right.
Now, in every group of 100, there'll always be 2 or 3. And my brother and I did a deal in Frederick in the 1990s. We lost $1 million over 10 years. I mean, it set us back really hard. So sometimes you make a mistake. And sometimes you'll make a mistake and be too hard-headed to admit it and won't listen to the people that are giving you advice to tell you to get out of it, which is what my situation was. So the great thing, the great Ron Jones line I love, and some of you that know him well have heard him say this, he decided as a young man he wanted to be a millionaire. And he didn't know, he didn't have any technical skills, but he said, if I can go out and buy enough real estate and have $1 million in mortgages, in 30 years I'll be a millionaire. Well, it worked out a whole lot better than that for him, but that was his original premise. He was just going to get $1 million worth of debt and have other people pay it off for him.
Every day when somebody rents your property, every day they get up and they go to work just so at the first of the month they can mail you a rent check and make you a wealthy person.
Right.
And time, remember what I said, time. So it's sometimes obscene when you think of what these properties are worth today and, you know, the loans are paid off. Then your problem becomes one more of a tax issue, and that sort of like takes you off just a little bit, but you got the cash flow.